Psychologists, what moment did you have with a patient that made you genuinely scared? A very sweet, mostly blind teenager who was going through his first psychotic break and had a love of martial arts. Taekwondo, if I remember correctly. Was really, really, really good at it. He couldn't see and would practice kicks, and at one point, accidentally kicked one of the reinforced shatterproof windows in the quiet room. Think padded room without the padding. Turns out they were shatter resistant. He destroyed it with that kick. Why those particular details? Because he would practice his kicks everywhere, was mostly blind, and the one time he flipped up to practice one and I was walking around the corner, it came literal centimeters from my face, and I felt the impact of it against the air, like a physical force bashing into my face. Sweetest kid in the world. He would have been horrified if it had connected, because things would have broken. A lot of things. He also grabbed my arm once in a suddenly firm grasp and asked if I wanted to do Taekwondo with him. No, I did not. Next story. Clinical psychologist here. I used to work in a prison and did a parole evaluation for an inmate that was a high-ranking gang member in a national gang. By his account, he was the highest ranking in the state. In fact, he was placed in that prison to hold his people accountable and keep the peace. He had a long, violent record and was, in my opinion, a genuine psychopath. Part of the eval is discussing the crime and assessing remorse and whatnot. He was so clinical in his description of how he tortured and left this guy to die over an unpaid debt. Live by the sword, die by the sword, was his phraseology for the act, like it was nothing. He was also very nonchalant about his ability to take care of his business while inside. I believed him. He had only spent 18 months of his last 15 years outside of prison. My recommendation was not to parole him. There were various factors that I gave, and in the end, the parole board went with my recommendation. So the part that actually scared me, and this was my first parole eval, was this guy's ability to affect the world outside. He could have sent someone to my house if he wanted to. I had no doubt about that. More experienced psychologists told me not to worry about it, that he knew the score and wouldn't take it personally. I had a hard time buying it. I was running a long-term offender group a few months later, and he was part of it. After the first group, I pulled him aside and asked if we were good. He smiled at me and told me not to worry. I did my job, and he didn't blame me for writing what I did because it was true. He went on to be a really insightful and active group member. Next story. I'm a therapist, but not a psychologist, if that matters. I used to work in a facility for kids and adolescents with pretty intense behavioral issues. Even when a client was aggressive, I was usually able to de-escalate them, and I generally didn't feel unsafe. In fact, most of the time, I was concerned about their safety during outbursts. With one exception, I had a client that was pretty strong and prone to intense tantruming. This client was acting in a way that was unsafe, had a plan to seriously hurt another resident, I think. So I had to put them on restriction, within staff eyesight at all times. Their response was to run up to me and attempt to choke me. Luckily, the staff got there in time and prevented this kid from seriously hurting me. On another occasion, this same client also took apart their curtain rod in their bedroom and swung it at my head. I dodged in time. Oddly enough, this client and I had a pretty good relationship the other 99% of the time, and I generally enjoyed working with them. 99% of the time we're great, but that 1% of the time where he's off, he tries to kill me. I don't think I'm taking those odds. Next story. Once when I was a medical student, I was asked to see a patient in the psychiatric unit of the emergency room. I walked in with my short white coat and clipboard and asked this guy what brought him in today and what was wrong. He looked me dead in the eyes, with foamy saliva dribbling from the corner of his mouth and a strange smell in the air, and said, "The devil told me to kill you and unalive myself." He was sweaty and his eyes were bloodshot, and his wife beater had dark red/brown stains on it. The door was behind him, and I wasn't sure I could make it there before something bad happened. No idea if he had a weapon on him, was afraid of calling loudly for help. I was in a quiet corner of the ER, and I felt like I would have had to yell to get attention, and I didn't want to startle him. I stayed there for a half hour and asked him more questions. Slipped out when he started to look sleepy. Next story. Not a psych, but my dad is a retired forensic one. He's got far too many stories, but his first ever murder case decades ago as a noob tube was a rough one. It involved a guy who kept asking this girl out. She made it clear numerous times that she wasn't interested, but the guy wasn't having it and just kept harassing her. Finally, one day he followed her home where he stabbed her parents and the family dog to death. I don't really want to hear about any of his other cases. Next story. Clinical psychologist in training here. I've never been afraid, but my friend had a client once who made her extremely uncomfortable. Without revealing any information that could break confidentiality, I will say that he had issues with self-pleasuring too much and not doing much else. And at one point asked my friend if they could watch adult content together in the next session so he could show her what he does. At another time, he talked about his self-pleasuring habits while touching his privates through his pants a bit. A totally inappropriate behavior, obviously. This client had lots of other issues, but when these things came up, her supervisor took her off the case because it wasn't suitable for training and my friend didn't feel safe. Next story. When I was studying psychology my final year, I had the opportunity to meet with convicted felons. Essentially, I sat down and spoke to a man, in his 30s-ish, who was a SAer. He told me he used to marry women and then SA their young daughters. Each was in the range of 6 to 7 years old. I listened to him explain it. It was literally my instructions not to judge them. I had to sign a waiver to not get emotional, so I asked him about the home life of those he abused. He'd say that some of the women he married had other children, and in one case, there was an older sister who was 13, but he would never ever touch her. He'd drop her off at school, where he told me he was never into any of the children he saw, and take her to practice in a friend's house. And while she was gone, he'd go back and SA her 6-year-old sister. He told me that it really isn't always about being attracted to prepubescent girls. It's about the dominance and power that come with having sex with them. He's being rehabilitated now, though. Weird part is that I wasn't sure if he was acting remorseful, because if he was, he's amazing at it. He was just very open to my questions and expressed regret, and I almost believed him. However, when I met a man who was convicted of child-adult content, his I feel terribles were transparent and so full of crap it was disgusting. My professors warned me about manipulation, so that was easy to catch on to. But the previous guy, he was either an impeccable liar and manipulator, or he genuinely wanted to get better. Crazy. Next story. Not a psychologist, but saw a breakdown in my ex that scared me senseless. He had just started meds, and the meds reacted horribly with him for whatever reason. He mostly had hallucinations, but sometimes he'd black out and do activities and not remember them. He would call me screaming at 3 a.m., and he didn't remember a second of it, any of it. He had hallucinations before, but they got increasingly dangerous with these meds. In particular, I think of one instance. While on the phone during an episode, he said, "I boiled some water." I asked why, as it was 3 a.m., and he replied eerily calmly, "They told me I have to stick my hand in there." It was absolutely terrifying. I finally begged him to go to the hospital that following morning to ask for a medication change, and he begrudgingly obliged. While he was there, he started throwing up blood and had to get his stomach pumped. Turns out, in one of his blackouts, he swallowed his entire bottle of medication. Next story. I'm not a psychologist, but I have 2 psych degrees and have been in and out of psychiatric wards since my late teens. For 14 years, I worked with adults with developmental disabilities. So, as you can imagine, I've seen my fair share of frightening behavior. But nothing scared me more than nannying for a 5-year-old boy with autism and a mood disorder. He had just been released from the hospital where he had stayed for a month to get acclimated to behavioral meds. But in the short 2 weeks I nannied for him, I feared for my life. He would kick, bite, scratch, hit, spit, come after me with knives, punch cars, scream loud enough for neighbors to think he was being abused, and destroyed his mother's picture-perfect apartment. And when I tried to tell his mom that he needed more help than a babysitter could give him, she fired me, saying I was wrong and that he just needs someone more attentive. Complete denial. Yeah, I hate to say it, but when you're in that denial stage that nothing is wrong with this person, they're basically unsalvageable until you open your eyes a little bit. Next story. Not a psychiatrist or a psychologist. RN on acute psych unit. I've had a few, but one that really stands out was a young and rather built fella. Perfect example of a sociopath. Charming when he wanted something, zero capacity for empathy. Lack of remorse, very manipulative. If you've seen the movie American Psycho, he nailed the role of Patrick Bateman. I won't give out too much information because I love my job and want to keep it, but anywho, just very cold, and I've never seen such an evil and malicious smile. Had that grin on his face seconds before assaulting a staff member. Next story. Obligatory not a psychologist, but I used to work as an aide in a special education classroom in middle school. The year I started, a majority of my workload was 8th grade boys, and 2 of them had deeply troubling behavioral issues. One kid assaulted a girl in his class, at school, in front of a bunch of other kids. He actually got arrested for it, but the school couldn't expel him, quote, because of his disability. For the rest of the year, he was forbidden from being anywhere, including the lunchroom, with her. I spent a lot of time essentially babysitting this kid, and because he didn't give a F about school, he did practically nothing during his time in the resource room. The last I heard, he'd been arrested again for breaking into someone's house and stealing a handgun. But the one that scared me was completely antisocial, to the point of threatening to hurt himself or others when a field trip or school assembly was coming up. We eventually had to tell his parents in advance so they wouldn't bring him to school. He talked about death constantly, all while extremely medicated, so that it was very muted, mumbled, and done through a 1,000-yard stare with spittle coming from his mouth. One of the teachers was pregnant. She wasn't his teacher, but he knew who she was. And one day he asked me, would Mrs. X's baby live if someone ran over her in a car? I told him I didn't know and tried to change the subject. Then he asked, what if someone cut her stomach open? What if they stabbed her? What if she had been dead for a while and no one found her? This really freaked me out, and I had to report it to the SPED teacher. When I told her, she said he asked her and the other students the same thing and scared the crap out of them. She said the pregnant teacher had been advised to avoid him, in case he did or said anything to upset her. Next story. My brother-in-law is low-functioning autistic and blind. At one point, his care provider, who had worked with him for years and knew him quite well, got into a very dangerous situation with him. She had worked with him since he was smaller and had become experienced at interacting safely when he would become angry and aggressive. They had found a good balance of medication for him, and she let her guard down. This time, though, he was now 20 years old and 6 foot tall. In a split second, he attacked her, jumping up from the couch directly across from her chair. He was very strong and viciously aggressive. I found myself in tough situations with him, and I'm 6'4", 225 pounds. After receiving quite a few blows from his hands, hair torn out and bites on her arms and hands, she was able to push away across the ground and get behind the couch he had been sitting on. She quickly slid the couch into a corner so that he wouldn't have a way around it easily, and she hid herself behind it and tried to be very quiet. He searched that corner of the room for over an hour, following the front and side edges of the couch with his hands, back and forth, pacing, until he eventually lost interest and went to play with some toys off in the corner of the room. She got out of the corner and ran for her door just as her assistant was coming to remind her that she'd gone over the allotted time. My BIL is an amazing guy, and I've had some awesome experiences with him over the years, but the idea of being hunted by sound like that is pretty freaky. Next story. Good friend of mine's wife is a psychologist at a well-known prison and sees some seriously effed up people for a living. Let's just say Hannibal inspired her to do what she does for a living, and she's as close to Clarice as a person can probably get in real life. She's usually briefed on relevant details before she's assigned to a case. This includes court proceedings, testimonies, etc. She's heard recordings of murders and other such disturbing crap. She's tough as nails, and I guess she loves psychoanalyzing scary psychos. She had to be taken off a case because she was so uneasy, disturbed, and threatened by one of her clients. Apparently, this guy was either a serial assayer or murderer. She couldn't give lots of details. But he has a victim profile, and she fit it. He started to behave strangely towards her, trying to converse with her and get to know her. He would write her letters and draw her pictures and attempt to give her tokens and things. All the things he would do to his victims. Well, everything possible under the circumstances. She was so upset and disturbed by his special attention that she was even afraid at the grocery store and started to feel uneasy in their home at night, despite the fact that this guy was locked up in a maximum security prison. She described it like a hunter-prey vibe on a really weird, animalistic level. She was taken off his case and received counseling. When she told me about it, she was very honest and matter-of-fact. This is a hazard of the job she works. While she may talk about her patients as if they're lab rats, this was one case you could tell really got under her skin and spooked her. Edit. Obviously, giving tokens and letters is not only creepy, but violates the doctor-patient relationship. She would decline very firmly and clearly, and I guess maybe some stuff was intercepted before he had the chance to try and actually give it to her. It's been about 10 years since I heard the story, but it stuck with me. Next story. Not an official psychologist studying, but my cousin seriously worries me. He's becoming more and more manipulative and psychotic, and once threatened to unalive himself if a classmate didn't give him back his game. My family can't do anything about it because my aunt and uncle are just as crazy. I feel bad for my other cousin because she's the only normal one there. Edit. My uncle has guns. He had a gun at his head when he made that threat. My family is mega effed. Next story. Worked in a mental health facility for children for 6 months. Saddest 6 months of my life. Top 3 shocking things that happened were severely schizophrenic 16-year-old teenage boy who was around 5 feet tall, 90 pounds. Would get put into a straitjacket during one of his episodes, and he could physically take down the 6'3", 230-pound male tech while being in a straitjacket. He would speak in voices that almost sounded demonic while doing it. It was horrifying. Severely schizophrenic 17-year-old girl would hide in a corner, wait till her targeted worker would walk by, stick her hands down the front of her pants into her privates, grab a handful of period blood, and smack us across the face with the blood. She did this to me more than once, and I had to go to the hospital more than once, during work hours to get tested, especially when the blood would get close to our mouths and eyes. Very sweet, but very nonverbal 13-year-old boy would be self-pleasuring, constantly. Pants down, chicken out, self-pleasuring all day, all night, in front of everyone and anyone. He had elephantiasis of his chicken and part of one of his legs. So these events were not only disturbing and inappropriate, there was literally a practical problem with him taking his 1.5-foot-long chicken out of his pants. It seriously took 2 people to put it back in, and then he would drop his pants and take it out all over again. Next story. A few people had unpredictable anger outbursts that could be scary at times. And once, a husband brought a gun to a couple's therapy session and threatened to unalive himself and his wife. Luckily, we were able to calm the situation down, but things like that can end badly, and you always have to be aware of that possibility when emotions run high. Next story. Oh man, once I was a psychotic, bipolar, in hospital, and imagine my parents and little brother were there, and I thought they came up an escalator and into the hospital. Not real. And my dad was about to be beaten up by these guys. I attacked the nurse trying to get to them, pushed her over, tried to pull out my catheter, and ran around looking to save my dad with nurses trying to hold me down. I feel absolutely horrid looking back because I really hurt that nurse, and by the time I came to, I wanted to apologize. Her shift had long ended, and I never saw her again to say sorry. Next story. Therapist in training and my tutor, who is a childhood abuse and trauma specialist, tells me some horror stories. The one that stood out for this question was a guy in his mid-40s who had lived most of his life with extreme paranoia that his parents were sending people to get information from him to blackmail him with. This guy was extremely unstable and was legally obligated to go to therapy after committing some petty theft because he believed his parents were tracking his money. Anyway, he'd been going out for about 6 weeks and he began to talk about a plan for the future. He was kind of vague, but said he had worked out a way to break free from his childhood and move forward. My tutor was apprehensive, but hopeful. He had been making good progress in the previous sessions. Fast forward a week, and this guy is back again. He's noticeably agitated and carrying a large sports bag. My tutor remarks that he's pleased to see him and likes his new bag. He breaks down. He confesses that he has a machete in the bag and had planned to kill everyone from his old life, starting with his therapist, so he could be free from his past, but she was very nice and would be hard to kill. My tutor politely excused herself and called the police. The guy was very compliant. He'd pretty much given up at that point, but the police confirmed he did indeed have a large machete in his bag and his car was full of bin bags. She said that was the only time she felt she was close to dying, and says the moral of the story is to treat all your clients well because you never know who's plotting your murder. Next story. I'm a farm worker. The grandson of the guy I worked for was off the charts crazy. The grandparents couldn't control him. They bought him a .22 rifle. It had a trigger lock, and they gave him a key and some ammunition. I locked it away because he was 6 years old. He threatened to shoot me, so I put him in timeout. He'd crap on the floor and laughed like a crazy a-hole. I came to find out it was his sister's rifle I took away, because a few hours later he came outside with his rifle trigger lock off bolt in and ammunition in his pocket to kill me for taking away sister's gun. Every day I had to deal with something like this. I've seen other workers chasing the 6-year-old kid with hammers. He was bat crap crazy. I have many stories about that year. I warned him to stop playing on the roof of a tractor. He would get hurt, and I'm not there to watch that bull crap. He starts to get down and just seemed to flop down on purpose. Landed stomach first on the back of the tractor. It would have hurt so bad. He cried for about 20 seconds, then cackled with laughter. He probably broke ribs, and I saw massive bruises on his stomach when he lifted his shirt to check for cuts. I watched him kill baby chickens by first saying how cute and petting them, then standing on them. He tortured the farm dog to the point it growled when he went near, and one point I actually had to stop the dog from killing him. It had him by the back of the neck and was chomping down. He was crying, then burst into laughter. I can't speak enough about this kid to convey the frustration he would cause. He scared me, and I was on a farm where aggressive black Angus bulls were a daily thing. Everyone hated that kid, and I'm relieved I'm not around him anymore. He's coming your way, psychologists. Next story. Master's level psychotherapist here was doing anger management with a young person, 19 to 20 years old, on probation for domestic assault. When we were talking about the situation and what happened, he said, quote, "My girlfriend had a smart mouth, so I punched her in it, her mouth." I was talking to his probation agent later about his cold demeanor, and he told me to watch him closely. Suggested, verbatim, that, quote, he could be the next Ted Bundy. This was a PO that usually didn't get involved with the treatment program unless his probationers were really high risk. His words had me spooked. Kid violated probation quickly and was sentenced to a few more years, which we all thought was fine by us. He was creepy. Next story. I've worked with a variety of accused murderers, including one charged with, and very clearly guilty of, a triple premeditated homicide. Never really scared of them. Even though they were mentally ill, they were still fairly rational. Working with a short, brain-damaged female who assaulted me, security, and a psychiatrist regularly. Yes, I stopped working with her because she didn't just fight, she bit and spit. After an hour of lockdown, she would be calm and speak, only to escalate in minutes and assault another staff member. So, have I been afraid? Yes, of the one most people wouldn't think is actually dangerous. Next story. Social worker at a psych hospital. Last weekend, one of the patients was petty in depth with his psychosis. All of a sudden, he comes around to a different patient and starts throwing fists, saying, "I'm gonna sock the crap out of you." But it was scary because it was for no reason at all, and he was so pissed off. I realized if I were standing anywhere different, he could have been swinging at me. Luckily, one of the nurses came running out and administered sedatives. Next story. Not a psychologist, but I was held in a behavioral center for having attempted to self-unalive when I was newly 13, and one of the patients in with me had to wear a helmet because he would smash his head into the wall. When the nurses would come restrain him, he would scream, that kind of scream that's so painful to hear, it just makes you want to curl in a corner and cry. He also apparently had a history of SA, and was the reason none of the patients were allowed to sit with their legs open. He terrified me. Next story. My wife and I worked as house patients for a dozen or so girls between the ages of 5 to 18, all of whom had varying degrees of mental illness. Had a 6-year-old who had brutally SA'd other little children at knife point and smeared their blood and feces all over herself and the walls of her room. When she was with us, she was bright, funny, and a sweet little child. Honestly, we had girls who had a history of animal abuse, murder, arson, violence, etc. But the ones who scared the absolute crap out of me were the manipulators. Now, all of them would manipulate, but not to this capacity. One girl had a history of accusing, with such incredible detail and consistency, men of SA, that she utterly ruined lives and broke up families with her convincing lies. As a male, rule of thumb is never be alone in a room with any one girl. With this girl, I couldn't even be in the same room without my wife also present and cameras constantly monitoring our interactions. So convincing or non-convincing, however good she is at lying, this just exploits a massive hole in the justice system. Just saying. Just saying. Next story. I'm a psychologist now, but between undergraduate and graduate school, I worked at this facility with a male teenage sex offenders for about 2 years. It was the single worst period of my entire life. When I started, I generally had faith in the staff, and I really wanted to help the kids. It probably wasn't 6 weeks in before all the stress got to me. The kids knew that most of the rules were not enforceable, and they could constantly curse at us, threaten us, steal, break rules, manipulate the system, and act out with very few repercussions. I think it was my second day there when I saw a kid break down a steel door with a chair. They would provoke staff. They would provoke each other so they could force staff to intervene and try to get the staff in harm's way. What's worse, I'm a bit of a straightforward and by-the-book guy, and the kids started to learn that I would enforce the rules, and they started to hate me and target me. I began to have chest pain on the drive to work. I would have trouble falling asleep at night because I would be imagining the threats and restraints the next day that I might be involved in. It does bad things to your psyche when someone can criticize you, make false allegations against you just to get you in trouble, lie to you, demean you, and threaten you for months on end, and you essentially can't defend yourself because you're constrained by your role. You can't hit them back, talk back, show attitude, and the only titles you can enforce or privileges you can take away, the kids could give a crap about. Meanwhile, you're giving them your everything: basic hygiene, school help, counseling, playing games, talking them through life issues, and putting them to bed at night. You're essentially their parent. But to answer your questions, yeah, I was afraid of several of them. I was assaulted 3 times while I worked there. 2 of the assaults were relatively minor, just a single punch to the chest or a single punch to the face. But one of the kids punched me 6 or 7 times in the head. One of the kids, who was HIV positive, anytime he would be mad or get in trouble, he would guilt us that he was going to die of AIDS one day, and then he would threaten to hurt himself and then get his blood on us. We had lots of gang members too. They were all highly volatile. Next story. Not a psychologist, but my mom was. When I was younger, 13-ish, she had a client who was in his mid-50s, and a predator and child SAer. We lived in the general area of him. She was legally not allowed to take or file a claim against him or put him in a mental hospital for that. Partially the fact that he completely thought he was in the right, and part of the fact that my little sister was around his target age range scared the F out of her. Next story. This is from my in-law. I was working at a juvenile detention center. One boy was only 10 years old, but had already committed SA and abuse. He SA'd his 3-year-old cousin and stabbed a student at his school in their back with a pencil. When I talked to him, I realized he had absolutely no remorse. He laughed, talking about how the baby cried, and said that he wants to do it again. He also regretted not killing the kid he stabbed. He understood the system too. He said, "I'm cute. I have curly blonde hair and blue eyes. I'm not black or something. I can do anything and get away with it. They don't know everything I've done either." When I looked into his eyes, I saw evil. And technically, he was right. About a month later, he was released back into his parents' home, and since they didn't want to ruin his childhood, they destroyed his records. It's been 15 years, and every time I hear about a murder essay, I think, was that him? Next story. Had a client years ago who had recently gotten out of prison for assaulting a police officer pretty badly. The client had a volatile temper and lived in a violent family growing up. The client never got angry with me, personally. However, while talking about their family and other people in their life, the client would get so worked up with anger that I sometimes wondered if I was safe. I started pretending to be on emergency call duty in the clinic where I worked at so that I had an excuse to carry a walkie-talkie with me during our sessions. Shortly after I began doing that, I terminated the therapeutic relationship and referred the client for a completely different type of treatment than what I provided. The last I heard, the new treatment method was helping the client. Next story. Not a psychologist, but am a sped teacher. I used to work in a self-contained room for behavioral disorders, high school. I have several, but I feel like I wouldn't want to share the actual emotional ones out of respect for those students. Behaviorally though, wowza. One of the craziest ones was the young man that I knew was a psychopath. His father was in jail for SAing the younger sister. He lived with his mother. He was a really nice lady and cared a great deal about how he did in school. Right before the father was to be released from jail, he tried to convince the kid to burn down the house in an attempt to kill the mom. He did try. He did manage to destroy their home, but he failed to kill the mom and he ran away. I was able to tip off the police as to where he ran off to. A couple months later, when the father was released from prison, he showed up to where the mom was staying and stabbed the mom to death. and back to prison he went. I had no idea what happened to the kid for years, but would look him up on the inmate search from time to time, until one day I had a hit. He was in jail for essaying a young girl and was in jail as well. He's since been rehabilitated and released and is now living out in the world amongst us. I have no idea where. I mean, what kind of redemption arc do you possibly have to go through in order to get exonerated and cleared like this? I feel like crimes of this magnitude, you should be locked up for good, or at least in a mental institution. That's very scary. Next story. I'm just an RN, but I used to work in a huge county jail. We had one inmate on self-unaliving watch over the weekend, and when Monday came and the psychiatrist came in, he was first in line. He was always polite with me and the deputies. He went into the psych's office, sat there for 5 minutes, all calm, then proceeded to jump over the desk and stabbed the elderly doctor with his pen. Stabbed him in the face numerous times. Doctor was out for a while and then just ended up retiring because of the injury. If he needed tier time after that, we would have to have 2 deputies in the infirmary and one watching him at all times due to his unpredictable behavior. I didn't even want to hand him his meds in the morning. He freaked me out so much. Next story. Was a drug and alcohol counselor for a while, not a psychologist. Had a client who I didn't make good progress with, and there was always something off. I sometimes ran into him at a local bar where he wasn't supposed to be. He was a court-ordered referral, and staying out of places like that was part of his treatment plan. I say this because it meant he learned one of the places where I socialize sometimes. Anyway, the stories he told me about weekends when he traveled away from that small town often hinted at essaying women. He'd say things about how, quote, she said she didn't like me, but she was really just joking and flirting. Anyway, I found a way to control her, so she wanted him. I wasn't able to pull enough detail to be positive or to gather any actual identifying information, such as exactly where he traveled to or what the girl's name was, but this happened several times. He was vague enough to be both scary and beyond reach. Eventually, he was moving away from the area, and at his last appointment with me, he hinted that we could throw down, and he would get his money's worth out of it. I watched over my shoulder until I was certain he moved for good. Next story. Don't know if this will get read, but I actually had the opposite problem. I was scared by a psychologist. I was in town one day and I checked Facebook before I left, and a friend of mine said his mom was looking for a lift home to the town I lived in, so I offered to help. I picked her up and we drove off. All I did was ask her how her day was, and she replied by telling me multiple stories about her parents that I know for sure you should not be telling anyone if you're their psychologist. So many things, like kids wanting to self-unalive, or being essayed, or just essayed several other things that I'd feel so betrayed about if someone just said them out of the blue like that. I tried to change the subject several times, but she just kept going. I'm actually seeing a psychologist right now, and that experience really scares me with how she could be telling her family my problems. Next story. Not a psychologist, but my brother is. I will not, for the life of me, tell anyone this guy's name. And my brother told me about it because it kind of messed him up. My brother started his practice, ran from his house, in the same city where I went to college. He worked with this guy who was in my class. We were both econ majors, and I saw him around all the time. He seemed pretty white bread. Wore tees and jeans all the time, headphones in, quiet. The only thing that was weird was he carried a laptop/briefcase in addition to his backpack. He started seeing my brother about 2 months into freshman year. He came in for depression and went through some basic stuff. He didn't feel like he fit in. He didn't know how to talk to people. My brother said this all felt very rehearsed to him, like he seemed to be rattling it off from memory. After a few sessions, things changed. The guy says he sees things. He said he can't stand being alone in dark rooms. His roommate moved out of his dorm, so it made it worse. He said he sees things move when he's in the dark. Small, almost imperceptible movements in the corner of his eye. He says he's scared all the time at night. This worried my brother because before then, it was just depression. Paranoia wasn't a good sign, and he started to think this guy was schizophrenic. The movements apparently got worse. Around late November, this guy started calling my brother's work phone, which happened to be a cell that my brother kept on him at night. 2 a.m., almost like clockwork, this guy would call. Because my brother was afraid this guy's state might deteriorate, he answered the first ones. He said it was awful. His voice was strained, and this guy was barely whispering into the phone. He could hear the guy crying. It went on like this for days. Eventually, it got to the point where my brother, at their next in-person meeting, told him he needed to take off second semester and seriously consider inpatient care, and that he needed to focus on other patients. He referred him to a health center and another psychologist who was more experienced with serious cases. This guy cried in his office after being told that. He cried and apologized for over an hour, and he just kept saying, "I'm so effing scared." I never saw this guy after holiday break. My brother has a few more meetings with him, and he agreed to an inpatient care center after a talk with his patients. 4 months later, it's April. My brother starts seeing lights outside his window at weird times. Not car lights, but like flashlights. He figured it was just drunk college kids being insensitive. One night, he hears knocking on his door, like quick slams, but he ignores it. That same night, he gets a call, and he's since changed his policy for late-night calls, and he ignores it. It's the guy. He's screaming into the phone. "They're back! They're back! They're back!" And he says it faster and faster until he starts crying on speaker, and he says on the message, "I'm outside! Please let me in! Please!" Before the message ends, you can hear him slamming on my brother's front door. The guy didn't talk to my brother after that. He self-unalived 3 months later, we found out. Next story. I work with special needs populations, all of whom come to us via referral, so when I have someone whose mother starts off by saying the school is misunderstanding her teenager, I know I'm in for something more interesting. This kid was 16. He was obsessed with several people who had been nice to him at various times. He considered them his best friends and had an entire inner world of how ride and die they were for each other. In the major case, he hadn't spoken to the other boy in 2 years since they had stopped scouting together. Patient heard a school rumor that his best friend's girlfriend had cheated on him with another kid and proceeded to pour kerosene on the girl's car while she was in it and try to set it on fire. Next story. Not a psychologist, but I used to have to escort jail inmates to sessions and sit in for them. They manipulate the living crap out of healthcare workers, and I was legally not permitted to say a word about it during sessions. They'd scam for meds, try to get all sorts of legal favors, lie their asses off, and generally treated it like a vacation or field trip. In one instance, a guy who had been previously convicted of SA of a minor under 2, and who had also done prison time for stealing urns from a cemetery, dumping the ashes out in a dumpster, and selling them for scrap metal, had this shrink tearing up with his fake life story and agreeing to prescribe him a ton of different meds he really didn't need and write a strongly worded letter to the district attorney in his favor. After the shrink did so, it ended up not mattering because he was given an additional charge for brutally essaying another inmate who was wheelchair-bound. I recall the shrink, almost distraught, remarking to me that she couldn't believe such a nice guy would ever do that. I just responded that the guys I bring in aren't in full restraints on accident, and that I'm lethally armed and armored during such escorts to protect her from them more than anything. I think that mental health care staff are good-natured and want to help, but naive as crap and are routinely scammed by scumbags. I also think that they tend to be a bit pompous, and it gives them blind spots, like a sorta "I'm too smart to ever be taken for a ride by my patients" mentality. Overall, I think they do a lot of good, but I think that they need to realize some of their patients more than deserve everything that's happening to them and are not worth talking to at all. Next story. Obligatory, not a psychologist. I was a patient in an inpatient-outpatient program for adolescents and children. So in the building, there were kids aged 5 to 18. For the most part, the older kids and younger kids don't interact, only saw each other in passing or if they had earned free time, like recess but inside. I earned a lot of free time and happened to befriend one of the younger girls. Maybe 6 years old and looked exactly like Dora the Explorer. She was so small and so sweet and really liked me, so I never saw her upset. One day we were coloring together with colored pencils in a quiet area, and her psychiatrist came in to check on her. Apparently, little Dora did not like said psychiatrist, because the doctor sat down with us and Dora instantly went silent. We continued coloring as the doctor was asking questions. Then suddenly, Dora began to rage shake. She went quiet, clenched her teeth, turned a nice, bright shade of red, and proceeded to stab the psychiatrist in the hand with her colored pencil. She stabbed with such gusto that it went all the way through this poor woman's hand. You could clearly see it coming out of the other end. It did not help that I was already there for trauma, but it was truly a terrifying experience. I still don't quite trust kids to this day because you never know what their little bodies are capable of doing. Next story. Not a psychiatrist, but a doctor friend of mine worked in dementia ward for a while, and he had a few scary/hilarious stories. Details are foggy. One night, he's checking on a patient who's been looking around with a look of abject horror. Eyes wide, mouth open, as if they couldn't scream but were desperate to do so, etc. He can't get a response or figure out why the patient is so terrified, until the patient responds, "He's behind you!" He turns around and there's a man, another patient, butt naked, covered in crap and effectively camouflaged in the low light other than his eyes. The next hour was spent chasing and cleaning a very slippery, feces-covered naked man. Next story. Went through hospitalization, and there is a mad lad who, during group therapy, during morning check-in, even during lunch, would stand and count us all. Occasionally, most of the time, he would skip me and two others. Always insisted we call him a hockey player name instead of his real name. Super strange. Other people with anxiety disorders would get up nervously and leave when he started counting. He would then recount. People who got up or stressed would be added to his count if he didn't count them the last time. I've heard it's relative to OCD and helps ground you, but 18 other anxiety and depressed adults getting counted by one old strange man? We thought it was some shooter mentality type of crap. Next story. When I was younger, after my cousin, also my best friend, passed away, I went into a state that was ultimately called bipolar or PTSD, but it varied. I could be really sad, fine, really mad, fine, really mad and violent, fine, and so on and so forth. I was 10 at the time, so there wasn't a lot I could do physically to a person. But my mom took me to a ward because I wasn't getting any better. I don't remember a lot of what happened, but I know I was deemed dangerous and unconscious most of my visit. I ran into one of my nurses. He recognized me and we chatted. I asked him about my time there, and he said that I was his most memorable patient. Why? Well, because I was the nicest kid they had ever met, but also one of the worst. I had apparently gone into these moods where I acted possessed, his words, writing weird and scary things on the walls. I was allowed crayons and coloring books and such. Mumbling things that weren't any language they recognized. May have just been nonsense. I didn't like women. Anytime a female came into the room, I freaked out. Must have been crazy to experience. Like I said, I don't remember any of this. I remember going in and the first couple of hours, check-in and meeting people, and then some bits and pieces, and then the last day I was there. Next story. It makes me sad to see a lot of these replies. I spent several years hopping around various mental health treatment centers during my teen years, and pretty much none of us ever got violent with staff. We were mostly normal people who were just struggling a lot. The only major violent incidences that occurred were people trying to harm themselves, not others. The worst I've seen someone do was throw a glass cereal bowl against the wall at breakfast. Not at anyone, just at the wall because someone made her really upset. The rest of us patients were shocked into silence because that type of behavior just wasn't common. I obviously know that there are violent patients out there, especially after reading these replies. I just hope these types of convos don't give people like myself who struggle with their mental health even more of a bad time. Next story. My mom's old doctor once told her story about a patient he had who was on this medication. I forgot what it was. One of the extremely rare side effects was temporary psychosis. It turned out that she was the one in a million that this happened to, and after a checkup with the patient in question, he went to the staff room where he found her completely naked and holding a knife. She chased him until security restrained her. Apparently, she can't remember a thing, lol. Next story. My mom was a clinical psychologist for a state prison system for many years, working with sexually violent offenders. Multiple episodes of SVU were ripped from headlines based on people she had evaluated. She had to view child-adult content at times as part of her job. After all of this work, she said she was no longer surprised by anything, no matter how violent the assault, how young the victim. Next story. I'm a psychiatrist. I used to work in a psychiatric ward, and the nurses called me because of a visitor who was making a fuss in the communal area. It was the boyfriend of a 16-year-old schizophrenic girl. He was making a speech about how we were keeping the patients in a prison, brainwashing them, part of the system, and why not? I asked him to leave as he was distressing the patients. He started to get violent, called me a female dog, etc. And now it's important to tell you that we don't have security in the hospital. It's a Catholic hospital and the nuns are against it. I don't know why. If the patients get aggressive, we deal with talking or medication. But he was not a patient, and mind you, I'm not a big girl. I'm 1.6 meters and weigh 52 kilograms. Anyway, the girl started to yell, asking the boyfriend to take her out of there, saying she was in great danger. The boyfriend told her he would do anything for her, anything to save her. A Romeo and Juliet scene, very dramatic, and I was like, "Sir, I'll have to ask you to leave." When he tried to beat me, another patient came up to help me, a big guy. He finally left with the maintenance guy escorting him and yelling at me, "I'm going to kill you! I'm going after you and I'm gonna kill you!" I went home that week looking from one side to the other. When the girl got better, she broke up with him. She said he was nuts. Yeah, you think? I'm glad that she finally came to the realization that he was in fact nuts, but good for you for leaving this guy in the dust. Next story. My story was with a 16-year-old teen girl. She was an adopted child. By the age of 14, she started to deal with voices in her head. Her parents brought her to me at that time, and it wasn't that much of a big deal, but the scary part was at the time she started to hear voices, she told me that there would be terrible incidents in the town after a year. I didn't believe that at the time. After 8 months, she comes to me again. Her parents told me that it was getting out of hand. I told them to wait outside and let me have a moment with her. She said, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Go ahead." She asked if I remembered what she told me when we first met. She said it was going to happen very soon, and it will be horrifying. That's when I got scared. After 3 months, there was a huge fire in the town hospital. Many were injured, no casualties. I was horrified by this. After a month, I was shifted to another town because of some personal reasons, but I still get chills thinking about it to this day. Next story. Clinical psychologist here. I used to work in a women's prison. Let me start by saying I was always treated correctly by male inmates and never had a problem with them. At this female prison, I had a number of encounters that made me look for another job. The female prisoner threatened to stab me in the eye with a pencil. Next session, she had a toothbrush that was sharpened and tried to lunge at me. Another prisoner, I had to write up a report on their behaviors. This denied them bail on grounds that they were not safe to the public. After this one, for a few weeks after, I kept seeing the same black SUV with tinted windows near my workplace and my home. It only stopped after I made a report to my work. Next story. Not a psychologist, but a regular counselor. I had my first meeting with a client that had done multiple heinous acts to children. He was allowed to plead insanity and was free to be within a small range from his home. It was his initial handshake that shook me. I hadn't read his chart prior to the intake, but from his handshake, I was terrified. From another job on the medical side, I was doing an intake helping a client fill out paperwork. He stopped, looked up at me with his cocked head, and began to growl and wrote 666 all over his chart. Somehow, the handshake was scarier than that incident. Next story. Not a psychologist, but was a CNA on a dementia unit. I had one man who has something called alcoholic dementia, and they can be aggressive, and rarely, some simply speak something we like to call word salad. The sentences never made sense. You'd only have to guess what they wanted or felt through their tone of voice and emotions. Anyway, I had open heart surgery when I was young, relevant in a minute, and this guy knew that. I actually really loved this man and thought he was so freaking adorable, until that day. He had to use the bathroom, and I was more than happy to help. He gets fixated on little things, and without really knowing that, I went against what he was saying without knowing he gets fixated on things prior to this incident. He had gotten mad, pushed me up against a wall, and told me he was going to cut me open and take my heart out. I nearly peed myself. I felt a warm sensation in my underwear. I was shaking when I left the room and asked my coworker to take over. I know his condition is out of his control, but I didn't look at him the same again after that. I was actually scared of him and tried to avoid him as much as possible. Next story. Not a psychologist, but I had my brother in and out for a couple years, and the daily visits were always something diff. A few things I remember. Smell. Always thinking like, I haven't had a wash in a week type of smell. Never got used to it. Characters. My bro was pretty chill compared to the rest, but a few stand out were his male Steve and my bro's worst enemy, Snacks. Steve, absolutely harmless, but through years of abuse, both mental and physical, then a road paved with hard drugs, he was way off center. He would throw fireballs and kamehamehas all day. He would hide behind a bush, charge one up, and let it fly at a nurse he was beefing at. Sound effects and all, and if 30 of those wouldn't work, he would find a better vantage point and start ripping arrows. Would do yoga, speak to crows, and fill me in on chakras and spirit bombs. Snacks. Not sure how old she was or what exactly was wrong with her, but it definitely wasn't good. Couldn't really speak, and she had a condition where she wouldn't stop eating, constantly stealing food from others. We would regularly visit and bring food for my bro, and a few times she would try to steal it or constantly hover around, so I felt sorry and used to grab extra cheeseburgers. As I was going to offer some one day, the nurse quickly stopped me and told me not to, as it could make her go nuts. She was my brother's worst enemy because he went to his cupboard to grab biscuits and they're gone, and he followed the crumbs to her bed. Felt sorry for all of the men there. They could tell my brother was loved and cared for, but so many are lost in their heads with no family or friends or visits from anyone. They go from meal to meds, riding a roller coaster of imbalance and instability. It was heartbreaking to see. Next story. In clinicals, I interviewed a subject, mid-20s, average white male. The study was over something benign like temper and eating habits. He was calm and appeared normal, but the way he stared at me was increasingly uncomfortable and I couldn't figure out why. I just asked a series of questions. It was a peaceful setting. His responses were typical, except for one. I asked if he thought he was capable of killing someone in a fit of rage, and without hesitation, his response was, "No, I don't need a reason to kill someone." Mid-sentence into the next question, I paused and asked him, "Did you mean you don't have a reason to kill someone?" And all he said was, "Nope." Then the edges of his mouth curled up, and I realized why his stare made me so uncomfortable. I changed every third question to probe for more signs, but he knew what I was doing. He knew everything about me. The public uses the word sociopath loosely, also not a proper term, but it's extremely unlikely you'll ever actually meet one. It was terrifying. There was nothing human about this subject. It was like talking to a machine designed for hunting people. It was the only time I felt the presence of true evil, and it still haunts me. As far as I know, he's still out there.